Welcome to the 168th edition of Europe Calling. Today, in collaboration with the Green MEP Alexandra Geese, and I would also like to welcome our panelists, who you can see, and I shall introduce them in more detail when it is their turn to speak. I am Maximilian Fries. I'm the Managing Director of Europe Calling. Some technical advice. I already told you that we'll be speaking in German and English with interpretation, and you can select the language in the control bar under the little globe. You choose your language and you will receive the interpretation as you wish. As always with Europe Calling, you can put your questions to us. And you can vote the questions of others up. We have 1,400 people registered for the webinar, and you'll have to help us by voting those questions up or not. And you could also submit your own questions. And please do put your name to the question so that we don't have to say a question from an anonymous user. As always in Europe Calling, the webinar is recorded and will then be made available later on as a podcast. This is the QR code for the questions. We will be starting with 3 presentations with Urszula Zielińska. She's a member of the Polish Parliament, and she's the co-chair of the Green Party in Poland and a deputy chair of the successful opposition alliance KO. And you've probably heard from that coalition before. Carlos Corrochano Pérez is an advisor to the Spanish Vice President and Minister of Labour and Social Economy, and a leading figure in the campaign team of the successful Green and left-wing electoral alliance Sumar. And then we'll hear from Alexandra Geese, Vice Chair of the Greens and EFA Group in the European Parliament. She's a leading digital expert in the European Parliament. Now, I would now like to call on Urszula Zielińska from Poland to please start. I'm really happy to have you here, and we'll be keen to learn from your experience and your learnings. Yes, hello, good evening to all.
If you allow me to speak English for the rest of the evening, that would be just a little bit easier for me, although I do speak and perfectly understand German. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you tonight, especially so since I do have some good news from Poland following the latest parliamentary elections, and I'm just hoping to share them with you and answer any questions you might have about the new situation in Poland. So yeah, I hope we will have a really interesting and good exchange on politics tonight. And this is me continuing right now without waiting for the question. So if I may share just briefly the outcome of the results of the parliamentary elections that took place on the 15th of October in Poland. We have quite a change in the political scene following the election results. If you perhaps know and remember, so far there was 8 years. We had 8 years of government formed by Law and Justice. The blue bar you see with in your screens. Law and Justice won the elections in the past 8 years with recently almost 44%. And this time it has already also become the #1 party in the October elections with 35%. However, it is not able to form a government, a majority government anymore. And so the other parties, I like to call them democratic parties, like the coalition group Greens are in. This is the Civic Coalition, KO. You can see a yellow bar in the screen. We were second biggest with just under 31% of the parliamentary result. This is a very center coalition, which where Polish Greens are part of. There is also the left coalition group, which resulted with just under 9%. And then there is a coalition group called Third Way, mostly constructed by a traditional farmers party, very well known with a very long tradition in Poland, and a new group, which in the European Parliament is part of the Renew. So with total 14.4%. And then there is a far-right party called Konfederacja, probably alike to the German AfD, if I can make comparisons. And this party has brought a result of 7.2%. Altogether, this may not look very clear to you with as to who can actually form the government in Poland, but it is meanwhile very clear as the three democratic center parties have very clearly announced that they will be forming a coalition government. And this is KO, the yellow bar, Civic Coalition with Greens on board. This is the left group, the red bar, and the light blue bar, which is the Third Way. We are just in the process of negotiating a coalition government. We're hoping to be to finalize that very promptly, possibly within next few weeks, and this government, this majority would have a very solid majority in the Polish government. Polish Parliament consists of 460 seats, and this coalition would have a majority of 248 seats. So a solid majority, allowing it to form a government. The timelines are now running. We're waiting for the Polish president to give a mission to form a government to one of the leaders of the majority parties, and we hope this will be the leader of the biggest party on the democratic opposition, and that is Donald Tusk. All democratic groups have already also clearly stated that they are happy to form a government with Donald Tusk as a new prime minister. There is a possibility that this process will be slowed down a little bit by the president. The president may decide to give the mission to form a government to the biggest party, which is the Law and Justice Party, which may delay the process by 2 to 4 weeks. But we all hope to have a brand new, democratic, pro-European, pro-green government in Poland by Christmas time. So quite a nice Christmas present for many Democrats in Poland and in Europe. So that's that is what that is the good news I'm bringing to you. I hope you share my joy and excitement about this. We had a very tough campaign in the lead up to the parliamentary elections. We had an extremely populist campaign run by the current governing party. Our public media has been misused to push a populist far-right agenda. It's not been fair at all. There has been a bit of a David and Goliath imbalance in all this. All the democratic parties were outspent by a few times by the current government. We had the last-minute deep changes to the election law, which again gave pushed the benefits towards the governing party. We had a campaign filled with scandals, with lies, with propaganda, really. Some compare it to Russia-style propaganda, and I think it's not an exaggeration. And yet the civic society managed to overturn this. What I have to say, what was really a driving force in the election results was really an amazing turnout in the election. 74% of Poles took part in the elections, and that has been unseen in Poland. That's a record participation in the whole almost 40 years of free democratic Poland since 1989. Even in 1989, the first democratic elections after communist era, even then the participation was about 63%, so significantly lower than now on the 15th of October. We also had a record participation from Polish people living abroad, also because Polish people living abroad generally vote very democratically, very centrally, and the latest changes in the election law in Poland were aimed to take these votes away, to really make it very hard for Polish people living abroad to vote. They often had to travel over 600 kilometers to be able to vote. Postal vote has been scrapped. So if you imagine, people were really traveling almost 1,000 kilometers to even be able to vote, and they did so with record high numbers, which was absolutely amazing. We also had a huge turnout in women votes and young people. Young people really were also a huge driving force. So these were the really elements which helped us absolutely immensely. We also had a quite a good level of cooperation between the three main democratic groups, which there was a lot of discussion for the last 4 years whether they should join their forces together, and if they did, possibly the result would have been even better, but they decided not to. Yet there was a decent level of cooperation and even supporting each other towards the end. As we knew, all these three groups have to really make through the thresholds, which are very high in Poland for coalition groups. That's 8% threshold, and we were mutually supportive of each other for each of those groups to really make the threshold. the elections were there was a lot of topics around migration, and very divisive topics were on the agenda of the current government, which tried to really divide Poland and has been doing so for the past 8 years. And so the election campaign was extremely polarized. And yet, almost on every message that the populist government was trying to drive through, there was a element of truth that we were able to unearth as an opposition, to show that is actually that the government is saying one thing but doing another. We had a huge visa scandal which emerged towards the end of the elections, with government trying to polarize us on the migration, using migration as a topic, using refugees as almost as a topic to divide the society, and yet there was a investigation that showed that the government is actually the government officials are most likely trading with visas illegally, and so this whole campaign was plagued by scandals of this kind. We had national security being the key topic, and yet we had national security issues. We are a border, we're bordering with Ukraine. There is war in Ukraine, and security was a topic a number of times. And it was very clear that the current government is not really dealing well with security issues. So these topics, even though very, very cynically used by the populist government, they did not help the populist government to win votes. On the contrary, the more the populist government tried to build on those themes, the more the opposition could show discrepancies and loopholes in our security, in the migration policy, etc., etc. And that also didn't help the populist government to renew their majority and to renew their mandate. So altogether, if I was to summarize, I think we really, as civil society, has shown its power and the love for democracy in Poland. We were one of the first countries in Eastern Europe to do so in 1989. And I hope we are also an important element, an important country to really break through this populist wave and the far right wave that is trying to play a role in Europe. And I hope that we have shown that it's possible to stop it, even if you don't have 1/10 of the money that your opponent has, misusing your tax money. And women and young people have shown that they love democracy. Not only them, but them also as a huge group which decided to help to swing the vote. And also the civil society, which ran extremely well a number of pro-frequency campaigns, absolutely was fundamental to this change. So with this on, I don't want to prolong the story, but I'm happy to share the news, but also answer any of more detailed questions you might have. So yeah, some good news from Poland. I hope you agree with me. And over to our studio to continue. Thank you very much.
Ganz herzlichen Dank, Ursula. Das war richtig, richtig inspirierend.
Thank you very much, Ursula. That was very inspiring. and gives all of us courage. Rare news are rather rare nowadays. We already have a lot of questions. Do continue to pose your questions and vote the others. I was asked whether we could translate the questions so that everyone who doesn't understand German can also understand the questions. This functionality doesn't exist. I have suggested this already. But do write me an email and let me know whether you have any other ideas, because it isn't all that easy to have both questions in both languages. Either way, that was a technical pointer. I'm now very pleased that Carlos Corrochano Pérez will be taking the floor. He's advisor to the Spanish Vice Presidency and a leading figure in the campaign team of the successful Green left-wing electoral alliance Sumar and Yolanda Díaz. And in July, we had the elections in Spain. We had a social democratic government as opposed to Poland. So I'm very, very interested to find out where there are similarities in the campaigns, what you learned. And dear Carlos, it's very nice to have you, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, everyone. Many thanks to Europe Calling and Max for the invitation. It is an honor to share this dialogue, this conversation with Alexandra and Urszula, whom I follow quite closely. First of all, I would like to turn the title of this session around. It is not about breaking the right-wing wave. We need to symbolically turn things around. Instead, in my opinion, it is about building a transformative, progressive green wave. We have to build this issue in a positive way, because the way we ask ourselves these kind of questions has a tangible political effects. In that sense, I have never quite liked the idea of the reactionary wave, that specific concept, because, to speak of a wave refers to a natural phenomenon, such as an earthquake, or to something inevitable. And the advance of reactionary forces is neither natural, because it has political causes, political roots, nor inevitable, as we have actually demonstrated in Spain and Poland. So as you know, last July 23rd in Spain, there was a huge surprise. As you can see in these slides, the polls and the media had been predicting a right-wing victory for months. The right-wing media and the right-wing political forces believed they were the winners many months before even going to the polls. And finally and happily, the alliance between the right and the extreme right fell several MPs short of an absolute majority and a parliamentary majority in favor of renovating, rebuilding a progressive coalition government was somewhat consolidated. Although, of course, the new balances and the need to negotiate with right-wing nationalisms make it more difficult to carry out a progressive agenda, especially compared to this last government and legislature. I'm also happy to share that a week ago we managed to sign with the socialists, with PSOE, a very ambitious agreement for a new progressive government, an agreement that's ambitious as possible according to the current balances of power, and that's actually how we understand politics. That's politics itself, to try to go as far as we can with the actual forces that we have. So, for example, in the electoral campaign, we said that our country had to choose between
Hey, wir haben, glaube ich, ein Problem bei Carlos. Warten wir mal.
We seem to have a problem with Carlos. Let's see if this problem resolves itself. Just a second. We'll take a brief break to see if he returns. Carlos, are you back?
Sorry about that. It was the connection. I was talking about the green side of the climate side of the agreement with the socialists. I was saying that this agreement also talks about becoming Spain, being able to become an European power in renewable energies, transforming the public schools in the face of the climate crisis, revising upwards and with more ambitious goals the objectives of the Spanish law on climate change, reforming the electricity market to put a stop, to put an end to profits falling from the sky, and for example, ending short flights when there is an alternative by train. So the big question would be, how did we get here? What was our campaign strategy? So basically, our goal in the electoral campaign was to champion the previous government's accomplishments, while at the same time striving for even greater achievements. So we aim to shift the focus of the campaign from these big political debates to everyday life, recognizing that the majority of people, of citizens nowadays doesn't trust politics or politicians. So at the same time, in the face of the reactionary wave of this reactionary advancement, our mission was to reclaim the future, the idea of the future, to address long-term, long overdue transformative changes, and of course try to outline a decade-long national project, what we have called Proyecto de País. So it is about creating and proposing new horizons, new possibilities in the midst of a crisis of the idea of the future itself. In that sense, we must dare to engage in a kind of sincere politics that addresses everyday life and confidently asserts that there is a future and that life can be better. And that's a simple but very powerful message. So in essence, we understood that the general elections were not solely about assessing the government or even Yolanda Díaz's performance over the last the past 4 years, not solely about asserting the labor market reform or the raising of the minimum wage. That these elections were about shaping the next 8 years, the next decade. So these elections revolve around the necessity of a national project for the next decade that tries to reconnect citizens with politics. In that sense, we have said it many times, and we always insist on this idea that politics should cease to be a problem and a source of division, and that instead it must once again become a tool for improving the lives of all people, all citizens. So we aim to propose a fundamentally different approach to politics in times of exasperation, of political polarization, a kind of politics that listens, that engages in dialogue, that seeks consensus, that tries and proves that is able to achieve tangible and concrete results. So just as common people strive in their daily lives to move forward, politics must endeavor to make life a little bit easier. And in that sense, to summarize or to try to summarize this really interesting and broad topic, we have, I believe, 3 things to do as both Greens and progressives. So first of all, to understand that politics is also about emotions and affections. Politics is about feelings. Neither now nor in the populist moment, as was coined by Chantal Mouffe, nor ever actually, politics has been only about reason, about being right. So we Greens sometimes, I believe that we sometimes find it hard to understand that it is not enough to be right or to have science on our side, to have scientific reason on our side. That is necessary, of course, but we still need to build convincing narratives that appeal to the heart, to the heart and the head, that also play on emotions and hope. Because if we don't manage to do that, we will be, mere technocrats with scientific reason on our side, but with no actual ability to change anything. Secondly, I believe that we must abandon for good the narrative of fear of the future, of which the far right is taking great advantage. So as Greens, we cannot fall into collapsist discourses, apocalyptic discourses, despite, of course, the seriousness of the current situation, of the current social and ecological crisis, because fear only generates paralysis or cynicism. So we need to work to offer an alternative and better idea of the future. And third and last, and I firmly believe that Sumar is an example of this. We need to forge great alliances to meet these great challenges. We need a green historical bloc. And I always insist on this notion, on this idea of historical bloc. It's a concept developed by Antonio Gramsci. It refers to the alliance of political forces, social movements, and institutions working together towards a common hegemonic direction, towards a common goal. It is not only a electoral coalition, it is a continuous and coherent plan of action. So in Europe, there's an obvious and immediate translation of this idea. And that is that I believe that we need to strengthen cooperation between Greens, the left, and socialists. And that's what we are actually doing in Spain with Sumar. And unlike us, progressives, the European far right has managed to do exactly that. So despite their many differences and nuances in foreign policy, in economic policy, and so on, they actually function as a single political subject and have understood way too well the need to cooperate, leave differences aside, and create transnational networks. And that's what we have to do right now. So in short, the right wing has turned climate denialism into its main flagship in Spain and in many other countries. So we need to make ecological planning in a social and democratic way. We need to make the just transition our flagship, our banner, our key flag. So of course, I wanted to end this with a positive message, with a message of hope. Let us not forget that what happened in Spain several months ago is now also happening in Europe. So we are seeing how 9 months before the elections, many people are telling us that there's nothing to do, that there are only 3 possible scenarios, either an alliance similar to Meloni's in Italy, or an alliance similar to Kristersson's in Sweden, or just to resign ourselves to the grand coalition as usual. And I think we have to say out loud, and it must be said that this is not the case, that we cannot be on the defensive. Look at what happened in Spain. Look at what happened in Poland. So hope is not a mere consolation. I believe that it is truly a transformative value.
Carlos.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Hope as a transformative value. That's a beautiful ending to your presentation. And I think we're actually called upon to find a green narrative, a positive narrative for the European elections, and someone who would actually like to work on that, and someone who's very active in this area and is very creative is Alexandra Geese, who's the vice president of the Greens EFA group in the European Parliament. And she has also negotiated the Digital Services Act, which is something like the basic law for digital markets in the European Union. And I am sure that Alexandra has a lot to share with all of us. She's also on the board of Europe Calling. Yes, dear all, I wish you a very pleasant evening, and thank you so much, Max, and to Ola for her beautiful Christmas present. With the election results from Poland, I would like to say thank you to you because the Christmas present will become even better. And thank you very much, Carlos, for the courage and for the hope that you inspire in us with a view to the 2024 elections in Europe and also in other parts of the world. Very important elections coming our way. Carlos said very rightly that we shouldn't really be discussing how we can break the right or the far right wave, but how we can construct a green transformative wave. And it's us who actually promote all of this and move it forward. But there has been a time not too long ago when we thought that the far right would be winning everything. Hungary and Poland were firmly in the hands of the far right. Then Sweden joined that club, and perhaps it's not the far right who's in power there, but who is very decisive. Then Italy with a clear fascist movement participating in the coalition government, and then Finland moved towards the right, and I think there are reasons for that. It can be explained because times are very difficult. The whole landscape is a very difficult one, and Max has already mentioned it. We have huge problems with the digital space and with what's going on in the digital space. Ulla said that we need to get rid of those divisive topics that are being ventilated and really propagated in the digital space. And the far right extremists really count on those uprooting topics that are very divisive. Three big narratives. The one of the huge exchange in population, that is fear that's being inspired by this narrative. Then the fear of women, of feminism, of women's rights and queer persons, that perhaps the patriarchs of this world will lose their power. And the third fear that is inspired by those narratives is the climate change or some green legislation. And we can see how this works in Germany extremely well. And it works very well to inspire fear in people, works extremely well because it becomes very, very visible in the internet. And that's got to do a lot with the business model of the internet, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all of them really generate fear and anxiety in the society at large. And it starts a ball rolling of interaction, of sharing these pieces of information, and those big internet companies really spread it all over the world. And that's why parties who really count on those topics are very, very successful. And the visibility is huge. The visibility of these negative narratives and messages. And all of a sudden, the whole debate shifts. Just have a look at what's happening at the migration debate in Germany this year only. And even if we celebrate the huge victory of Spain, of the Spanish elections, we can see still that the Conservative Party also gained and that they didn't do very badly in the elections. Things turned out positively in our view, but it was a huge battle and it wasn't very clear from the outset. So the question really that we should put to ourselves is, what do we have to do now? I think we'll have to really become active politically to change the way that the internet works. All content must be visible on an equal footing. And I'm not talking about censorship here, but we cannot allow just anger and misinformation to be spread, because there are other voices to be heard and to be read, like those who appeal to the understanding, to the reasoning, to responsibility, and so on and so forth. And that is something that can be achieved with the Digital Services Act, which is applied, which has been applied for the past few weeks. The Commissioner has already written very harsh letters to TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and others, because the algorithms are at fault and work sort of against the truth and against proper reasoning, and cause this unequal representation of misinformation and truthful information. And I think we really need that sort of activity of politicians, like, for example, defeat the Russian disinformation or climate disinformation. And that's something that we can do and that we have to do, because what we want is an equal sharing of information and of all sources in the internet. The algorithms need to be changed, and it'll take some time. And of course, the big internet companies will probably sue the European Commission or others. But if you talk about it with international experts, we have endless discussions with our colleagues in the United States, for example, and I have understood that it's also one of your concerns in your election campaigns to simply show how this misinformation is spread, and it can all be explained. Not everything that is trending in Twitter is actually the opinion of the vast majority of the society. So you don't have to continue propagating these opinions, for example. You just have to do a lot of explanation. Climate information, for example, we had the debate on the heating legislation in Germany, and it was an excellent draft. And then it suddenly looked as if the Minister for the Economy wanted people to get rid of their heating at home. But that wasn't the case at all. So you just have to be very careful about the narratives and about the defense of the proper truth. And you really have to have an exchange with all the civil society. It's not our idea at all to have people share the same opinion all the time. No. The Democratic parties, as Ola said, they supported each other. It didn't mean that they took votes from each other, of course, but they simply cooperated in the discussion, in the way they moved forward. Obviously, if violence is at play, some Green members of the party members were attacked with flying stones in public meetings, for example. That's something that cannot be allowed. But we have to talk with all the other democratic institutions in our society, like, for example, the churches or the trade unions, and that these things cannot be tolerated. The violence can never be tolerated. The Americans always said we need resilience, which means that we need to explain to our own people what's happening. And I think in Poland, you're very well prepared for that. But for us in Germany, that's very new. All of a sudden, the Greens are being pointed at, and they're being hit by the public anger, for example. So we need to explain, we need to raise the awareness, we need to support people who all of a sudden become victims of hatred and hate campaigns in the internet, for example, who are rather defenseless. They need the support to defend themselves. And Carlos mentioned something which is also very important, and that is communication. And I think strategic communication is of utmost importance. Like, for example, working together with scientists. What are the narratives of the far right against some scientific findings, for example? We can start a debunking affair. We can already prepare for all the lies that are being spread on the internet. You have to be ready to defend the truth because 2 or 3 hours later, once something has been published, it's almost too late. So you have to anticipate those lies coming along. You also have to be very clear about your own values. You have to be proud of your values and always be steadfast. And I think Carlos was very clear in this respect. And we, as the Greens, we always feel that if we use the proper arguments, it'll work. But we have to enter into an emotional communication. Max, I'm really sorry. I'm taking too much time. Give me another 30 seconds. But we need a positive narrative against the fear and anxiety narrative. The power to believe in something good and positive, be full of hope, but also reach out to those people who are afraid of the future, who are fearful, and show empathy. Really share with people that you want them to be part of the solution and not really be victimized. And I think I'm grateful to Carlos and Ulla for their participation.
Thank you very much. And we already have a whole lot of questions that have been posed. The audience, do go in and take a look at these questions. But before we do so, I'd like to ask all three of you something that you mentioned, forging alliances. Carlos mentioned it, Ulla as well. And Ulla said that the three democratic forces supported each other, but you didn't explain this in any more detail. Could you perhaps explain in more detail how the support panned out? And then the question would also be, how do you deal with differences of opinion? Also for Carlos, if you want to build up a positive narrative, there are things such as migration, for example, where even within your alliances, there's different opinions also with regards to Russia or Israel. How do you deal with this in these alliances? How do you ensure that the partners stick together, even if there are differences? So 2 questions. How do you support each other as democratic forces? And how do you deal with differences of opinions within these alliances? Ulla and then Carlos.
How do we supported each other? Initially, it wasn't so clear, and it wasn't very much the case. And perhaps about a year ahead of the elections, and even 5 and 6 months before elections, we realized that whenever one of the 3 democratic groups is gaining, another one is losing. So instead of taking away from the far right and from the populists, we were taking from each other. And this was very much the trend, very close, almost into a month ahead of the elections. And then we started to make a very vocal, almost pleas and kind of support gestures towards each other. So everyone made an effort to avoid any polarization, any division between the 3 democratic groups. So all the leaders always tried to emphasize that we will form the government after the elections together, that we will all cooperate. We have far more joint themes and policies than anything that divides us. And then very much towards the end, even the leader of the biggest opposition group, Donald Tusk, encouraged voters to also vote for the other 2 groups because they were very close to the threshold. And so at the end, I think this has really worked. This has encouraged people to believe that these 3 will be working together after the elections and are capable of forming a government together. So they were from not much support at the beginning, went from no divisions policy and building common sort of platforms to verbal and vocal support for each other towards the end of the campaign, just before elections. And I think this has really helped, and some of the voters really went in to help to make sure that all 3 groups get in to parliament and can form a coalition government.
Carlos,
You want me
gerne
to-
auch dazu. Wie schafft man es dann, sich
Carlos,
gegenseitig zu unterstützen?
how do you manage to support each other within these coalitions? And how do you deal with differences of opinion?
So, well, I have to that's a very good question, with a surely a no easy answer, but in Spain, I have to admit that it has been quite easy to do so, despite many and major differences. For example, in foreign policy, mainly. So it has been understood and commonly shared that we are in a moment of historical exception, and that we have to recover in a sense. And this is going to seem a little bit controversial, but the spirit of the first international, the spirit of the first international at the end of the 19th century, in which very different and diverse factions were united under a common and minimum program, mainly the reduction of the working day. So as I said before, the right wing has understood this need much better than we have. They have understood that in order to actually change things, they need to act as a single block, putting aside their differences and sometimes even renouncing to their principles. So what we have in front of us is what we have called along this conversation the reactionary wave is in reality a international wave of denialism, of different denialisms and negationisms, and we need to understand that connection. So it's a wave that unites climate denialism, that which observes without any kind of concern that how we have accumulated in July a couple of months ago the 7 hottest days in 125,000 years. The one that unites democratic denialism, negationism, the one that that which justifies and not only that but also applauds the attacks against the Capitol in Washington or the Planalto in Brasilia, and finally egalitarian denialism and egalitarian negationism, that which pretends to make us believe that it is somewhat natural that 10% of the population condenses 76% of global wealth. So that's who they are actually. So that's so how the right and the far right have understood that they need to put their differences aside, and their strategy is actually working. So we need actually to replicate that strategy in our own terms and with our own program. And in reality, the right-wing political forces deny the problem, the climate crisis itself, in order to reject the solution. They deny this problem, the climate emergency, because otherwise they would have to accept that the just transition is urgent and that it must be financed above all by those who have the most and pollute the most. They deny the problem because if they would have accepted, they would have to admit that the system in which we live is neither fair nor efficient. So as I said before, we need to replicate that strategy. We need to put differences aside, and we need to understand that we are in the midst of a historical exceptional moment.
Danke dir. Ja, ich glaube, über das Thema Bündnisse und Bündnisparteien.
Thank you very much. When it comes to coalition and coalition parties, we could certainly organize a whole webinar. There would be a lot to discuss. I think somebody who does politics in Germany might see it somewhat different. For example, when you speak to Austrian, there's a different coalition cultures. So some very interesting questions relating to coalitions. But allow me to now pose questions about civil society. And before we do that, perhaps I'll get to the second most upvoted question, and I'd like to ask Alexandra. Unfortunately, no name was mentioned, but nevertheless, the question is very important. What is the influence of Russia when it comes to supporting right-wing groups? And to what degree should we react strategically or tactically on that influence? Perhaps Alexandra could say something about that, but afterwards, the two of you as well. Thank you. It's a very interesting question. Russia indeed has a lot of influence. Representatives of Putin work closely together with right-wing extremist groupings in the US, white supremacists or Christian fundamentalists. They work together with Orban and Meloni. They organize conferences regularly. So these are structured, loose alliances that don't only meet in the internet, but also physically. And of course, they exchange messages. And here Russia is, of course, a country that does a lot. Now, when it comes to Russia's influence on right-wing movements in Europe, this is well known. Poland is perhaps a big exception, but it's very pronounced in Hungary. Or there's rumors that the Lega in Italy was financed, or Le Pen. But the question was also, how does this affect left groupings? That's very interesting. And I do think that that is somewhat country-specific, but there are some movements that use Russian narratives. Sarah Wagenknecht is, of course, the most famous example from Germany. I don't think I need to say anything more about this. We have this narrative of the loss of purchasing power, rising energy prices. That is, of course, all politically planned, and that one could once again agree with Russia and simply accept what they're doing in Ukraine, and then all of these problems would be solved. Or the topic of weapons. Now, money is being spent for weapons for the Ukraine, but then there's no money left for the own citizens. Especially when you speak about these social topics, then I do believe that there is a strong influence that is being exerted. You hear this from left movements, Sarah Wagenknecht, or in Italy as well. So I would say that the influence is not as direct as one might think, but there are certain narratives that work on the very left side of the political spectrum as well as the very right side of the political spectrum. And because these narratives can be tested in the internet, you can optimize where people interact, how this works. This really has a scientific foundation. So these are narratives that work, that also work at ours, and then also put the democratic parties under pressure. And I think Spain found a good way with a progressive coalition, which very much focuses on rights and equality. But in Germany, in our coalition, for example, we're struggling with this because the coalition is such that it isn't all that easy to change, which is why I do think that one can react to this by explaining it, but it certainly isn't easy. You then have to carefully consider what you want to react to and what not. And of course, you have to offer alternative solutions that can also be understood emotionally. That's extremely important. Thank you. Carlos, in my preparation, I read a report about the narratives that have been pushed also by the right. And there was this delegitimization of the elections, the fake news, the disinformation that the electoral law would be changed in such a way that it would only be good for the left, and that a lot of Spaniards living abroad, I don't want to repeat it, but this delegitimization of the elections, is this something that you also felt in your campaign work, that you had to firstly explain to people that the elections are secure? Was this a narrative you also encountered? And then perhaps you could also speak about the bigger picture that we have just alluded to.
Well, that was, of course, part of the narrative also here in Spain. We've seen it, in many places. We are currently we are seeing it right now in Argentina with Javier Milei and in Latin America as a whole as well. We've seen it in many other places. I don't know about the situation in Poland right now. Maybe Ula can talk us through, how the far right has reacted to the electoral results. But of course, it was a main part of the narrative in Spain. I wouldn't say it was the probably the most important one, but that always plays a role. As I said before, we need to understand the reactionary forces as a mix, as a coalition of different kinds of denialism. I spoke, in those three different types of denialism, of the democratic denialism, and that specifically has to do with it. It's an important key. So we shouldn't be on the defensive on this topic. We need to put forward a narrative that displays the benefits of liberal democracies for all the people, for all citizens, and a new narrative that doesn't leave us only or merely on the defensive.
Can I?
Ula, vielleicht genau. Einmal zu Russland, vielleicht auch
Ula,
gerne noch.
perhaps also a few words about Russia.
That's a good question, because it's always very hard to pinpoint those influences in the government party, but whereas they're very clear in the extreme right, the Confederacja party, which is the one with 7% election results. Literally, the narratives there are almost copy-paste from, Russia Today, and we had a full-on campaign against Ukrainian refugees, saying stop all support to Ukraine, etc. That was very overtly, clearly kind of pro-Russian or copied from Russia narrative, whereas the ruling party, the populist Law and Justice, is more subtle in that. But when we looked at the actions, there's been a lot of cooperation with Viktor Orban, with Marine Le Pen, a series of meetings almost right up to the moment when Russia invaded Ukraine. A few weeks beforehand, our prime minister was meeting Viktor Orban and Marine Le Pen, and a week later, Viktor Orban was drinking champagne with Vladimir Putin, and then 2 weeks later, Vladimir Putin invaded Russia, and then Poland suddenly was selling very strategic assets from our state energy companies to Hungarian energy company that is, publicly controlled and known for its ties to Russia, or when the whole Europe has actually come out of importing Russian oil, Poland suddenly was the last country in Europe that was still importing Russian oil into February 2023. And is, Polish big oil company is still importing Russian oil into Hungary and other countries in Europe, claiming that it cannot withdraw from it. So the narrative is anti-Russian, maybe anti-Russian, but the actions, when you actually look closer, are very much pro-Russians. And also at the end of the campaign, we suddenly had a very clear message. Poland, it's time for Poland to get out of the European Union from the government-backed media. So that was clearly very, even with vocally being anti-Russian, the actual strategy was bringing us closer and closer to Russia. And whether this government is currently in denial about the election results, it still is, because we still, it's still in power, and it's still claiming that they will regain the majority in government, in parliament, that starts in a week and a half from now. The prime minister is still claiming that he will get additional votes within the space of the next week and a half, and that he claims he can form a government. So we're still, the current populist government has still not handed over the power. They're still preparing as if they were to form a government, even though they have absolutely no majority whatsoever. So I hope it will not get into anywhere close to what we had in the US, but we'll see. I hope Poland can do it smoothly and peacefully, and this is what I obviously wish for all of us. But we'll see in week and a half when we have the first vote in the parliament.
Wollte ich gerade sagen, dass du die USA erwähnt hast, das klang mir sehr nach 6. Oktober 2020.
That you mentioned the United States. It really sounded a bit like the assault on the Capitol in the US. But we do have another 2 or 3 specific questions which I would like to take up. We have received many questions on the issue of using the progressive narratives of the left. What would be the tools? Marie of Party asks, I think she's a journalist, how can we use artificial intelligence against right-wing governments? Did you use that in against the opposition in Poland? Was it used, artificial intelligence, against the opposition parties in Poland during the election campaign? Then the media strategy, should you use TikTok in order to reach out to the young population? Should those progressive forces in the society use the social media, TikTok, and so on and so forth? Alexandra Geese was talking earlier on about the Digital Act. What are the tools, the digital tools that we use to reach out to certain pockets of the society? Do we use TikTok? Don't we? Perhaps I would put the question to Alexandra. I think we've lost Carlos once again, but perhaps Alexandra can start. Yes, let me start with TikTok. That's a question that we've asked ourselves also. It's even more problematic than all the other social media, using siphoning off the personal data and using them for other purposes. But TikTok is also making every effort to uh, to operate according to the lines and the regulations of the European Commission. But it is controlled by the totalitarian government of China. So the way forward cannot be a way where we avoid reaching out as progressive powers to the young population. Ola was describing how important the turnout of young voters was, and women, and they are on TikTok. If you want to reach them, you have to go and use a TikTok. It gives me a bit of a problem. And it may be painful to actually make that move, but we should use a TikTok. At the same time, we need legislation to control the use of data by TikTok, and TikTok also has to abide by the same rules like everyone else. But we have to be present on TikTok. There is no other option, because the young voters are important to move forward in a progressive direction. And the AfD, for example, that's something that we've seen in Germany, is represented over proportionally on TikTok as compared to other political parties. So it gives me a bit of a stomach ache, but I think we do have to use it. What about the artificial intelligence? Well, artificial intelligence, I'm very skeptical. I think looking at fake pictures, fake news, fake porn pictures, fake attacks against women, it can really be generated easily by artificial intelligence. And that is why the European Commission is very interested in deleting such pictures from the internet if they were generated by artificial intelligence. How we can use it progressively, I really don't know, because we really stand for quality. But in order to create a trend, perhaps we can pick up all those messages and the values that we all share. Like Carlos was talking about the democracy denial. That the right-wing parties always try to attack the democratic institutions. And we can explain that this is not the proper way forward, that things work quite differently. In the climate policy area, for example, we can move forward together, because then they will be taken up in the media. We just need to talk to each other. I don't think that we need artificial intelligence for that, but we need to coordinate amongst those alliances defending more or less the same objectives, and that we talk about it. And it's very, very important, because the right-wing parties always have a lot of support when they generate fear in the society, and they always get supporters for that. We need those kinds of supporters for other proper topics like climate. Ulla, on TikTok or...
Yes, we just, I couldn't agree more with what Alexandra just said. We have to be there where people are. And we were, as opposition in Poland, having so much against us, every odds were against us. We had to try everything. So we were on TikTok, and I can see how TikTok is reaching really many more young people than I can reach with Facebook or Twitter or even Instagram these days. So definitely we have been using it, from biggest leaders to smallest parties. Yes. Artificial intelligence, not so much, at least not knowingly, in Poland yet. There have been some attempts, highly criticized ones, even one from my political group, Civic Coalition, which used a real quote from the Prime Minister, and just instead of writing it, created his voice to read it out aloud with AE, and this was highly criticized in Poland, mostly because it wasn't clearly described and clearly marked. So, but as far as I know, specialists on AE say that there's not been much of the AE used in the Polish campaign, based on current knowledge.
Danke, Ulla. Carlos zu TikTok und KI.
Carlos,
Yes,
on TikTok and AI?
That's a really interesting question. In Spain, for example, we are seeing how, in several social surveys and in several polls, how the whole society has become increasingly right-wing, increasingly rightist in its attitudes, in its affections, especially after the pandemic, or because of its impact. But the sector of the population that has become more righteous in this sense is the youth between 18 and 25 years old. And if we open TikTok, I'm sure that we will quickly understand why this is happening. And I'm not saying this, to raise an alarm. I'm saying it precisely to make the point that we need to intervene in those spaces, that we need to reclaim them. I'm not going to say that technology is neutral, but I am actually saying that technology can be redirected by politics. So of course, it is not enough to, it is not enough to be in TikTok. We also need to use its codes, its language, its style, its new ways of communicating. Because sometimes we see how some politicians try to use TikTok, but with the codes or style of Facebook or Twitter, and I'm afraid that that can be counterproductive in some sense.
Vielen Dank.
Thanks very much. I think that we've replied to many questions already. Perhaps we should come to the top voted question. Alex, sorry, I haven't raised it yet. Alex is asking, how did you achieve the high turnout in Poland? How did you motivate people to actually cast their vote? We've heard a little bit about it. The women, for example, because of the abortion legislation, probably. But I would also like to ask Carlos, what was your turnout? Did you see a repercussion of the turnout on the election results? But first of all, I'd like to ask Ola.
Very importantly, the very hard ban on abortion in Poland that the Law and Justice government has introduced has motivated women. Women were the group that was protesting almost every year or every other year of the Law and Justice government, with huge marches through biggest cities in Poland. And then those women were really motivated at the end to go and vote Law and Justice out. And so this was a huge group that helped. The other element was we had a number of brilliant campaigns created by civil society, literally bottom up, to motivate both women and young voters, especially, to vote. We had a celebrity campaign, run by celebrities to motivate people to vote. We had activists motivating others to vote. We even had the biggest charity in Poland that has been running for years and years and has always tried to be very apolitical. This charity also stepped in at the very last stretch of the campaign and almost tweaked their outdoor campaign in such a way that they were not overtly saying, let's vote the goodness and vote the evil out, but everyone understood the message. Let's vote the evil out. In a way, they said this. And so all these independent social campaigns have really helped to motivate. And they were everywhere, from social media through to outdoor, but then also 2 huge marches that happened were led by my group, but also they were very open and very inclusive. One on the 4th of June in Warsaw, and another on the 1st of October, so just 2 weeks ahead of elections. The last one mobilized about 1 million people in Warsaw to walk out on the streets and just be together, and it was the happiest march I've ever seen in Poland, and with people wearing white and red hearts, a symbol of civic coalition, but it was very, very inclusive, very kind of not very political, and so people really joined in, and I think this also helped to mobilize people.
Carlos, wie war das bei euch mit der Wahlbeteiligung?
Carlos, what was the turnout and the effect of the turnout in your elections?
Well, in Spain, the same thing happened. That is actually currently happening in other countries, both in Europe and Latin America, that women are the ones who are holding back the far right. So in our case, and in general terms, the turnout was very similar to the previous elections, to 2019, with an abstention level above 30%, with a turnout rate of 66%, I believe. And in that sense, I believe that we have a very serious problems especially in European societies, that we are unable to connect with the popular classes that feel that politics is basically useless. And of course, it has been a problem for decades, but to which we are not being able to find a proper solution.
Dankeschön. Jetzt haben wir noch 5 Minuten Zeit. Ich würde gerne eine kurze Frage nur an Ulla stellen, weil es eine sehr polenspezifische
Thank you.
Frage
We have 5 minutes left. One short question to Ulla because it's a very Poland-specific question. And then I have another question for the three of you. Katalin Haimai from Hungary asks the following. I'll say it in English.
How does the Polish government plan to transform the judiciary, media, and independent institutions captured by the current government without violating the rule of law?
Very difficult question. Also considering that we have a president in power for the next almost 2 years, who is clearly the president of the Law and Justice governing party. So it won't be easy. But for sure, there are many decisions that have been taken by politicized, unconstitutional bodies, like Constitutional Tribunal. Almost all of its ruling taken since 2016 can be invalidated because it was taken by judges who were not constitutional judges. So there is a way of already invalidating certain number of decisions just purely because they were not legal, or they were taken by people who were political nominees and not real lawful judicial nominees. So there are this will be done step by step. It has to be done so there is a huge will amongst the democratic parties to do this absolutely by the book. We absolutely cannot and must not allow to use the tools that were created by the populist, non-democratic government to then reestablish democracy. We must play really by the book. And so it will take time. Everyone is acknowledging this, but it will be done, and it will be done by the book, step by step. We will wait with the deepest changes. We will have to wait probably for the President Duda to be voted out. 2025 is the end of his term, and he cannot run again. There will be new elections, and I believe there will be a more democratic president. But even in the course of the next 2 years, there are ways to do certain amount of reestablishing of rule of law just purely by revoking some illegal decisions that were made. But no doubt it will be a very long process.
Danke dir. Das war eine wunderbar kurze Antwort.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderfully short reply to a very complicated question. Thank you very much indeed. Allow me to close with one question that Nadine asked. It is the most upvoted question. I'll summarize it somewhat. Now, migration is something that a lot of people are focusing on. We all said how important it is to spread positive narratives. However, migration is a topic that is a big topic in many European countries, not only in Germany, rightfully or not rightfully so. And it is also going to be an important topic in the European elections. Now, my question to you would be now, in Germany, we have tendencies, also within the Green or left movement, to say more hardness, but also more solidarity and humanity, but also more deportation. The communication doesn't seem to be 100% clear. Now, looking at Poland, how did you solve this? How did you do this in Spain? How do you speak about the topic of migration? And then perhaps Alexandra could be the last one to take the floor. But in my opinion, migration is something that is a big topic. And of course, you don't want to not speak about it, but you want to speak about it correctly. So how to speak about it correctly? Ola, Carlos, and then Alexandra.
Tough question for the end. We have, on one hand, a lot of illegal pushbacks that we just need, and we were talking about. Not everyone wants to talk about them in Poland, but as Greens, we do. And people have, a lot of people appreciate that someone is really openly tackling the subject, and this needs to stop. And actually, that's clear. It needs to stop. Then there is work migration. Then there are Ukrainian refugees and who just, Polish society has moved to welcome them, and was very open to offer support. And I think it will continue this way. And then there are refugees from the rest of the world, including from the Middle East. That's where the society is most polarized, and the current government has not helped this topic because it misused this topic to polarize people even stronger. And here I think we need to have a very frank discussion. On one hand, we need people. Our visa scandal shows that there is a huge demand for working people in Poland, and I know in the rest of Europe, and we need to just have a very clear policies for accepting those people who we need as a workforce. And we need to have a human rights-based policy for people who need help, because we made their life hell, as well as a global north, creating a climate crisis. And so we owe them the support now. And we need to have a very frank discussion about this. And we finally need to have and persuade global north for more effective climate policies that will help people in the global south to stay home and be safe. And therefore, they will not need to run for water and food and safety, because we will stop polluting, and creating hell in the global south. And we also need to take responsibility for this right now, because it's us who are creating this issue. Mostly it's us, Europe, US, China, the biggest polluters. So we just need to have a frank discussion about this, and also make people realize why people have to flee, and what to do to enable them to stay home. And I believe if there is a frank conversation without using this to scaremonger and divide for political benefit, that's the way to go.
Danke dir. Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos.
So, of course, each country has a different reality, but in all cases, we need to have a human rights-based approach, not based on the economic capacity that migrants may bring, not using a utilitarian approach, nope, on human rights. Because doing the opposite is entering into the framework of the far right, and within that framework, they will always win. In my opinion, the inability to actually do this is what explains the rise of political phenomena like Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany. And in fact, for example, going to our specific case, to the Spanish scenario, this is probably one of the main differences between Sumar and the PSOE and the socialists. We've had very important differences and discussions on this issue, both at the Spanish and the European level. And that is mainly all. I just wanted to thank you very much for this discussion, and many thanks to Max, to Ula and Alexandra, and I want to reinforce this previous idea of the historical block. We need to have more spaces for debate like this one to to make that big and broader coalition possible. Thank you.
And I'm joining in with the thanks. Thank you so much for organizing this discussion. That's really helpful.
Das kann ich nur zurückgeben.
I can only thank you. And we are, of course, going to carry on with these discussions. Worry not. But we'd now like to give Alexandra the floor for her concluding remarks. Well, that's a lot of responsibility, and I also need to try to respond to that difficult question. Now, migration, as I said, is a topic that is being pushed by the right-wing extremists, and that's also why it is such a big topic. Let's not forget that. Putin also likes to use this, both online, but also by bringing people to the borders. Now, I think that the solution lies in three different aspects that are somewhat contradictory for some people, perhaps. I think that we need a somewhat pragmatic approach. We cannot only say that the problem doesn't exist. We need to recognize that some communities are very much overburdened, so we need to consider what can be done. This includes providing more funding to communities for the tasks that they need to overcome. We also need to be willing to compromise if we want alliances. We cannot simply insist on ensuring that what we consider right is being done. But if we now deport more in Germany, that doesn't mean that we get rid of the problematic perpetrators. Instead, perhaps some people are being sent back to Iraq that are in the midst of their education. That also needs to be clarified. The right to asylum must be clarified, and we must also clearly stand up for it. And I agree with Carlos. This needs to be clear. And I think in Germany, there still is the space for do this. And also for this to be attached to an emotional, positive message. Now, we mainly have people from Syria and Afghanistan applying for asylum. These aren't countries that you want to devote people to at the moment. The third thing, however, and that brings me back to what Ula said when it comes to positive communication and pragmatic actions. Well, the biggest issue that we currently have in Germany is not migration, even though it might be perceived that. No, the biggest problem is a lack of skilled workers. Every company you speak to will tell you we have enough orders, but we do not have sufficient people to produce and to deliver. Everyone's complaining that the service is terrible, that you wait for hours, coffee shops and shops are closing because they no longer have the workers. But at the same time, we have people sitting in homes that cannot work and would like to work. And improvements have been brought about when it comes to accessing the labor market. But we should focus on ensuring that qualified people can offer a constructive value added in our society. And that's a nice positive message where we say we're not going to strengthen the messages of fear of the right. No, instead, we're disseminating this message that we're lucky to have a lot of space for these people, that we need these people, and that is why we should ensure that they can constructively help our societies. And this would be kind of my solution, that we spread this kind of message.
I think I can. Okay. Because I would join in and thanking everybody, especially Ula and Carlos, who have my time. I know you're super busy in building your governments, your alliances. And so thank you so much that you took the time to share your learnings with us. I think that is super important. I would also support what Carlos said. We should meet more often in a more structured way, because there's so much we can learn from each other. And this is really extremely, extremely valuable for everybody. I appreciate it so much. And thank you so much. And thanks so much also for Max for the great moderation and the organization by Eurocall. Perfect as always. And thanks everybody for the great listening.
Danke auch von mir. Ich habe in den Chat noch das nächste Webinar mit Alexandra.
I too would like to thank all of you. I posted the next webinar with Alexandra in the chat, with Nobel Peace Prize laureate. We're also going to speak about migration at Europe Calling again. most likely on the 27th of the 11th, a week later, where we're going to get together with representatives from communities to see what can be done better at a local level, not only with regards to migration, but in general, how municipalities can be better equipped for the challenges of the future. All of that is going to reach you by email. I wish all of you a great evening. Thank you very much for staying here for 10 minutes longer. There's still 400 people here. Incredible. I think it was worth it. A big thank you to all of you. Well, best of luck for forming your governments, and let's all have strong green voices in future governments. Have a nice evening and see you next time at Europe Calling. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.